Okay, so we are continuing on the topic of sex. And so there's a lot of things that we're going to be covering in this next segment, but I want to start off by bringing up a question that comes up quite a bit with people. People think about, okay, well, you're not supposed to have sex before marriage. Is that just intercourse? Are we just talking, like, what about everything else but? You know, I know that some people actually are like, well, you know, there's some places that I've heard, well, anal sex, fine, no problem. I mean, you know, you think about that, it's just like, it's kind of missing the point. You know, if it's just sort of an everything else but, you know, like we can have oral sex, anal sex, any kind of other sex, but if we don't have intercourse, it's really missing the heart. And I think that's actually the way that people relate to the Bible a lot. They really don't look at it from the perspective that a lot of this is understanding God's heart and making decisions. We talked about in the opening that making decisions that are about really having an understanding of the value and why we're doing certain things. And it's not about just being all about, we need to keep the rules. You know, that's what we call a legalistic point of view. You know, the Bible talks actually quite a bit about relating to Scripture as the law versus grace, you know. And so if we look at the Bible where it's just rules, then we're going to look at it as how do we get around the rules? Which is kind of a ridiculous point of view because it's not about the rules, it's about why. It's understanding why God instructed certain things. So if you think about this, if the whole point of being abstinent and waiting is so that you can, you know, share that experience with the person that you're in love with, then it's not about the actual technicality of sexual intercourse. You know, it's about having those experiences with somebody else, that intimacy of being naked, of touching one another, and all the other parts of that are a part of what is about that intimacy. It's not about the actual technical act. It's about the whole lovemaking and about that intimacy is a continuum, you know? And so the more intimate you get, the more connected, the more bonded, the more welded that you become with somebody. So it's getting honest about how those things affect us. You know, it doesn't work to just sort of lie to ourselves and pretend that certain things don't affect us that do. You know, so part of this is really getting clearer and, you know, about how we're affected. I want to take a look too at just the scripture on this. 1 Corinthians 7. I'm actually going to, in this instance, I want to read out of the King James version because it's clearer than the NIV in this part of it. It says, in 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 1, it says, "Now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman." Now, that doesn't mean like, you know, I touched you. That's not it, actually. You know, like, that would be silly. But the touch is actually that it says it's good for a man not to touch sexually a woman, it says. But nevertheless, to avoid fornication or sex outside of marriage, then let every man have his own wife and let every woman have her own husband. So basically the idea is get somebody to touch if you want to touch somebody. You know? That's the context that God designed it for. So if you can think about, like, it's not that the idea is to not touch somebody sexually unless you're married to them. Would that probably include oral sex? Would that be touching sexually? You know, I mean, anal sex? You know, I mean, if we're really looking at this and getting honest about it instead of just about trying to follow some rules, you can see that you're going to be affected by all of those things, not just about intercourse. In fact, it's kind of interesting because when I first committed myself to abstinence, I didn't get it right. You know, it wasn't like I just started off and it was a breeze and I'm perfect and never had a challenge. I mean, if you've spent your life, and you know, I was older when I did this too, so I had a lot of years of living differently, so it wasn't the easiest thing. And so part of just in that growing process was going from, you know, saying, okay, I'm not going to have sex, where sometimes I said no like, but I, where, where I got involved in having people touch me, or got kind of further down the road, but then I was able to say no before maybe it got to intercourse. And that was progress for me. It wasn't like desirable, but hey, I was moving in the right direction of being able, because that was huge. I just thought I could never just stop, So that was like one of the stages for me of learning to just interrupt it sooner, before I got too far down the road, and getting better and better at that. But one of the things that really bothers me is like in that years of abstinence where, sometimes the things that bother me the most are where I didn't have sex with somebody, because the more recent experiences were things where it was more just petting, But that's the part that actually pierces my heart a lot. It's just that anybody else touched me. The fact that another man touched me that I'm not married to, these people, I'm just like, oh, it just hurts. It feels sad. And I know, my husband feels sad about that. And I feel sad about him, when I think about him. And, he was with 2 women, so he didn't have the promiscuous background that I had had. But still, like, we shared about before we got married, about how he was feeling about my background. But then also, it just bothered me that I, could imagine him having sex with the 2 women that he was in a relationship with, and it didn't feel good to think about that. So it's being honest with yourself as far as how things are affecting you, and really about what touching sexually is, and taking a look at that, because all of that movement into more and more, sexual touching is actually going to be what bonds you more and more to somebody. So anyway, it's what you want to do is play it forward. Like look ahead at how these things are going to affect you down the road. A lot of times I think we get stuck because we're not really looking at what the long-term effect of what we're doing. We're kind of living for the here and now and what we want, what feels good right now, and not really looking at the bigger picture of how the decisions and choices that we're making now are going to affect us down the road. So now I want to talk about kissing, because sometimes I know that in some people say that kissing is touching sexually. So I want to talk about that, because I do believe that there is a difference between petting and kissing. And because petting is something that you don't do publicly, that it's not, it definitely has more sexual connotation than kissing. I get that obviously it's not like you're not going to be, aroused or something kissing somebody, but I do feel like it's a different situation. I don't believe there's a sin in kissing, but I believe that one of the things as far as kissing goes that you want to be aware of is you want to get honest about how kissing, if you're going to, kiss somebody, how it affects you and how it affects the other person. People have, greater or lesser degrees of sensitivity as far as the impact that kissing has on them, or what it means, or what it represents. So we want to be aware and honest of our behavior and how it's affecting another person. You can be really selfish or self-centered. I mean, one of the things that I really regret is an incident where, I think I might have talked about this in the opening segment, but where I dated a guy that I wasn't really that interested in. I was sort of not really interested, but I got myself all wound up that I hadn't kissed somebody in a long time, and I just really wanted to kiss somebody. So he took me out, and I was kind of thinking, I made my mind up ahead that I was going to kiss him, even though I really wasn't that interested, so I did. And he was way more attached to me than I was to him. So when I kissed him, at the end of the date, he definitely thought that I had way more feelings for him than I was really representing there, and his heart was already kind of more attached to mine. So he was so misled. I mean, it was something that was really, where I used him, I really did, and I felt really bad about it, because the next day he sent me a big thing of flowers, and I was just like, oh. I felt terrible. I felt like I know I took advantage of his vulnerability. I mean, he had feelings already, and then I just kicked him up a bunch by leading him into this wrong idea by kissing him, and so he really started having expectations from that, of course, that it was going to be, that I was in a different place. It was so awkward. I felt really bad. I just, didn't call him for a while. That was not a good situation. And then finally I did. I called him and told him, you know, in a nice way. I just said, I'm sorry, I, you know, was misleading you, and, you know. And he said he felt a lot better just knowing, because I just disappeared. So just because it's a kiss doesn't mean that you can't hurt somebody. And so our goal is to take care of people's hearts, to be responsible, to be deliberate about things, to not just get swept up in the moment and just do whatever because it's feeling, you know, you're in the moment, but to be deliberate, to really be thinking ahead as far as when it makes sense. Sometimes you can kiss somebody and maybe it's not a big deal to them, not a big deal to you, or whatever, you know, or like we have a very small church community, so in a small church community, that can be complicated. If you're kissing somebody and you don't really have, you know, an intention of having it be more serious, that can get messy. So it's just, what's great about walking with God is it isn't like these cut and dry rules. It's really about heart, of really getting it and understanding why you're doing things. That things are done, you know, out of truth. It's truth and love. The combination of honesty and love blended together will always be a winning combination. You know, being honest with yourself, being honest with others, and walking in a way that's loving and respectful of other people. So anyway, so that's it as far as the kissing. And it's also good to communicate about these things too. You know, I know that some people say, oh, it takes the spontaneity to talk, you know, to talk about. It actually doesn't. I know a lot of people, and it seriously, it actually helps, you know, to talk things through and not just to, you know, be reckless and, you know, do whatever in the moment. And it still is very exciting and romantic and all that kind of thing. Actually, in some ways, it's more so, you know, from people that I know that have handled their dating and their affection that way. I want to talk a little bit about some things that come up. A big question is masturbation. I know a lot of times people have an idea of saying, like, you know, masturbation is a sin. You know, like you hear that a lot. Well, I've read the Bible cover to cover a whole bunch of times, and you can't document that in Scripture. You cannot say, see, there's the verse of Scripture that says masturbation is a sin. I think that where masturbation comes into being a problem, actually, is more about where your mind goes in masturbating. I think that it's totally possible, and I think actually if you've been somebody that's had sex for a while and are trying to be abstinent, I actually think masturbation can be really helpful and help supporting you in that transition. But I think that one of the things that to understand is that you want to try to keep the way that you fantasize in masturbation a place where it's more about God's design. Because there's a couple things that have affected the way that we typically think of sex. Pornography and sexual abuse, and I'm going to talk about each of those, have had a big impact on how we relate to sex, like how we think about it, and past sexual experiences too. So that combination of having premarital sex, pornography, and sexual abuse has a tendency to give us the image of sex that is very different than a lovemaking experience, you know. So if you are feeding in masturbation, if your fantasy, you know, your fantasy in masturbating are things that are taking you more to a sex that is detached or a sex that is not about relationship, that's where you want to guard your heart here, because it's actually going to take effort and to change the patterns as far as how you've been affected to think about sex. I guess it'll be easier for me to explain if I talk a little bit about pornography, because I think pornography has drastically affected how people perceive sex. It's really pervasive. I'd say most people have been exposed to pornography, or I don't know if most, but certainly a large majority. I know it affects men in particular. Most men have definitely been exposed to pornography. Pornography is also really, really addicting. You know, it's something that's a great way to numb out and to escape. But the problems with pornography and why this is something that's hurtful is if you take a look at what sex is intended to be, that sex is supposed to be about relationship and about closeness and about communication and feeling safe and feeling exposed. Well, pornography is as opposite of that as you can imagine, because all the images in pornography are completely detached from relationship, from caring, from love, from respect. You know, sex typically in pornography, it's kind of funny because women won't typically talk to men about this, but if you talk to women separately, women's desires are not to have sex like pornography. You know, if you talk to women, like, women's desires are not to have quick sex where there's no talking and where, you know, it's illicit and you're having sex with strangers and, you know, or, you know, rape fantasies or things like that that you see in pornography. The way sex is even carried out is just not typically the way women like to be made love to. Even physically, women physically cannot get aroused. You know, it takes a much longer period of time for women to get aroused versus men. Men get aroused like that. Women, it's actually a very long period of time. So you think about, why is it that women are designed where it takes them, I forgot what the time period is, but it's like 10 times the amount of time that it takes a man to get aroused. I think it's like 10 minutes for a woman and 1 minute for a man or something. It's just, it's really, I should have looked it up, but it's a very extreme difference as far as the time of arousal goes. Well, if you think about that, why did God design that? Doesn't that seem weird? It's kind of incompatible when you think about it. You know, it makes for not the easiest sexual experience. You know, if you think about these physical differences. So guess what? There's only one way to deal with this, and that is communication and love and patience. But in pornography, sex is made out as if women could get aroused like that. So it's completely opposite nature in the way that women are built. And so, unfortunately, women are thinking that this is what men want, and women are trying to live up to what they see in pornography to make men happy, but they're not being happy in the process and being silent about it. That the reality is that women are just not speaking about this because they think they ought to be like somebody in a porn film. Women have a lot of anxiety about their bodies, you know, because pornography is predominantly something that men are attracted to, and I think it makes sense that men would have more desire or appeal because they do get aroused so quickly. So what it does is, for a man, it's like you can be aroused quickly, you can get the satisfaction without any of the work. Because guess what? Making love actually takes some work, you know. It takes some effort, it takes some understanding for good lovemaking to happen, because it's based on relationship, not on some quick fix. So some of the problems with pornography, as you can see, because it's, you know, playing into the whole differences between men and women. For one, you know, you've got women's bodies that aren't real. You know, you've got, today, I don't think there is any porn movies where women don't, you know, have implants. So you've got breasts that aren't real women's breasts. You've got bodies that aren't real women's bodies. And typically, you know, you're not going to have a woman that looks like that. And so, you know, one of the things that's a struggle is having somebody that, you know, and having a woman. I mean, this is one of the reasons why women struggle with pornography, is feeling like they were supposed to measure up to something that they can never measure up to. But then also, you know, also like I say, you've got the detachment, you've got the rapid sex, you know, kind of thing. So, so what it does is it hurts relationships, because sometimes, like I say, in long relationships, there are times that sex is not easy, especially when the relationship's not new anymore, and you've been, you know, when you're new lovers, usually sex doesn't take that long. You know, it can, you know, doesn't take as much effort because it's all new and exciting, and so it's easier to kind of get there quickly. But over a sustained relationship, it becomes way more pronounced that a woman's, you know, like her cycle from start to arousal becomes more apparent, and you have to talk that through, you know, and you have to be sensitive to one another's needs. So what happens is, when the things break down in the marriage with sex, which happens, or whatever relationship, then a lot of times it's just easier for a man to not deal with the trouble it is to work it out and to escape in pornography. You know, I'll just take care of it. And then what we get is that we get marriages where people aren't really making love, or they're trying to get it going by some artificial, you know, thing by watching pornography, you know, where that's what it takes. It's not about communication or really understanding what the other person wants. You're getting yourself all riled up and so that's how you're going to make it work. So these are some of the things that you know, that are an issue with pornography, as well as, you know, for both men and women, like, it distorts, you know, what the lovemaking is about. So we are sexual creatures. We all think about sex, and that's a good thing. We're built that way. You know, as adults, do expect that you're going to think about sex. But what we want to do, because the kind of sex that's in pornography, and it's a more extreme high. Do you know what I'm saying, in pornography? So you think about it, it's like a different thing to rebuild. We want to rebuild the fantasy of how we want lovemaking to be lovemaking. For men and women both, it's actually important to like rebuild your fantasy life. And including when you're masturbating, to be thinking about, like, to try and change it. And it's not going to happen overnight. If you've had years or whatever, long exposure to sex being something that's calloused and self-centered and self-seeking and, you know, no relationship, like pornography, then it's going to take some time to rebuild, looking at it as far as like building a desire that you'd like to be made love to. That you'd like somebody to take care of you and take care of your body, you know? Somebody that actually cares about you and cares about how you feel, and that you could talk to, and that you can even share things with. For men and women both. I mean, men, wouldn't you like to just be able to share with a woman what makes you feel good and what makes you feel special, and be able to talk about that? Wouldn't that feel great? Wouldn't that feel great not to be compared to somebody? You know, to have it be where it's an experience of feeling close and feeling free. Part of it really is, it's not just like, I'm not saying just because it's close and intimate that it has to be some missionary position sex thing. You know, it really can be fun and adventurous and exploring and trying different things, but in a way that both people are getting taken care of in it and understood, that there's understanding even and closeness that grows out of that, where you know, it's just great to not have walls about really making love. So part of it is like, you can help yourself when you're thinking about sex, when you have sex come up in your mind, if you've had it be like some image of wham bam, thank you ma'am from the, you know, from pornography or something like that, to just, you know, like that's the kind of sex that you've been thinking about, to think about it of how much you'd like to have somebody hold you and touch you and cherish you and make love to you, you know, and how nice it would feel to have that closeness, and to go ahead and think about sex, but think about it more as a relational thing rather than, and what you desire one day, that you desire to have that in your life one day. So it's actually a positive experience to be thinking about sex and to be rebuilding the way you relate to sex in your mind, and that's going to take time, you know, but it can be great. You want to build your anticipation for that relationship one day. You know, because then you get that it's worth fighting for and it's worth waiting for. You know, to build the thing of going, I really want that. I want to be happy with somebody. I don't want to be like everybody else with these failed relationships and empty relationships and sexless marriages and all that. So these are some of the things as far as, you know, breaking down. Another one that gets in the way as far as our sex images and how we relate to sex has been sexual abuse. I was, you know, the way, when you have been abused as a child, or the other thing is not even just sexual abuse, if you were exposed to pornography as a child, it's not normal for little children to be exposed to those kind of images. Those are traumatic. If you're a young child and you saw pornography, you know, that is a traumatic image for boys and girls both to witness something like that. You know, it steals your innocence, as well as, of course, being sexually abused. If you were introduced to sex when you were a child, you know, by, you know, a family member or you know, somebody, or a stranger or a friend or something like that, it's really, what's happened is this is your first introduction to sex, which is very profound. So a lot of weird things kind of happen as a result of that. If you think about this, these are your first images of sex and what sex is. So you can imagine the imprint, the deep imprint that that has of not knowing what sex is and that that's your first exposure to it. And a lot of times there is arousal as a child. So you've got all these weird feelings where it's kind of exciting and you're feeling ashamed all at once. And these can be very complicated and difficult images. Oftentimes, as what happened to me, the way you were abused winds up being what you were attracted to, which seems really odd. I mean, sometimes people do the opposite, you know, run from however they were abused, go the other direction. But sometimes the response and what happened to me is however you were sexually abused, that's actually something you're drawn to, strangely enough, because that was your first image, that was your first, like, imprinted you. It kind of like wrote the wiring of what your sexuality is because that's your first impression of it. You could see how deeply profound this is. So we want to have some understanding. Like you see the people that are pedophiles, you know, have typically been people that somebody molested them. You know, you see, you know, people with all kinds of issues as far as sex and sexuality, that, you know, prostitutes, you see, you know, strippers. I mean, it's just really not an accident that if you interview these people that so many of them have been sexually abused. And if they weren't sexually abused, then typically they've been abused in some other way or abandoned or had, they didn't get what they needed. You know, they didn't get in their upbringing. It's not like people just turn into prostitutes and they had some loving family that was there supporting them, telling them that they're valuable, and now you're a prostitute. It doesn't happen that way. You know, and you know, that these are things that grew out from something getting warped in the earlier years as far as sex and sexuality. That doesn't mean that it's over. It doesn't, you know, obviously with God, God is full of grace and can heal anything. No matter what you've been through, no matter what your experience, God loves you. And He is willing and able to heal any kind of trauma that you've had in any of these ways as far as sex and sexuality goes. It's a miracle, honestly, that I can enjoy a really wonderful relationship today. But one of the things that I've had to come up against is like really not allowing myself to entertain thoughts of some of the ways that I was introduced to sex that are twisted. Because it's actually really easy for my mind to go there. So I have to guard that and say, wow, that's a place that I was hurt. I don't want to go back to that place. It's not what I want for my life, you know? So we have to kind of, the Bible talks about guarding our heart, you know, remember? So we want to take care of our heart in this area as well, as far as how we are relating to sex in a way that we're taking care of our heart and keeping it tender. We want to keep it soft and tender and open and vulnerable in a way that's, you know, that's healing, you know, for the way that we're relating to sex. So part of the thing too, I talked about, you know, how before I stuffed it down and I minimized. One of the things as far as getting healed from sexual abuse or from, you know, being exposed to sex, one of the struggles, you know, with that is that it's going to take time to heal. Be understanding that it's not something that, boom, happens overnight. Counseling can help. I went to a great Christian counselor. There's some great ones out there. Being in a community where you have people that can support and love you. And also part of this is grieving. It does not work to pretend that something didn't happen, to just shove it down, stuff, you know. That's what I didn't realize. I thought I was doing great because I stuffed it down there and thought, oh, I'm a tank, I'm good. I was proud of myself. But I didn't realize if you don't actually deal with the stuff, it shows up in other places in your life and you start acting out, and those old things that happened to you are running your life. They're now running the show for you and you don't even know it. And that's what was going on for me as far as coming from the sexual abuse, and here now I'm acting out on all of that. You know, and I'm having all of these completely dysfunctional relationships, not being faithful to anybody, being promiscuous, having sex with all these people. These were things that were really a result because I didn't get the healing. So part of the healing process includes grieving, which is allowing yourself to go ahead and be sad and to cry and to have somebody else there to, you know, to support you in that and to understand and to affirm that it was a really hard thing that you went through. It wasn't like no big deal, you know, and to get the gravity of what happened and that it shouldn't have happened, you know, that you didn't deserve it. Um, so there's a process here that in community. There's also, as far as just the healing process and all of this, there's, the path to healing is there's sex and love addicts. There's 12-step program for this kind of thing. People that are addicted to sex or relationships and love, that are out of control, which I think that's where I was. I didn't even know that there were 12-step programs at that time, so I got, healing through the counseling. But a combination of, if this is up for you, just get as much help as you can. Get your team together. Get a support team. Because God's plan A as far as healing is not just that God heals you by himself. Poof. Any real change, any sustained change, you need the body of Christ. The Bible's very clear about that. You need other people to be there. You need people to give you love and grace. A lot of times what you're doing as far as acting out on all the sex stuff, it has to do because your tank, you need love. That's what you're really going for, is you need to feel loved. So if you have people there that you need, that's why you need community, and where people give you lots of love and fill your tank so you're not feeling so empty. You'd be amazed at how much that quiets down that out of control desire for sex. It really does. I didn't even think that was real. Another thing that actually helps if you're trying to change, speaking of all the things that you can do to help heal and to help change, to help heal this process, is getting affection. My counselor told me this. I thought she was crazy when I was started, in my abstinence journey. She said, sometimes you just really want, like, a hug. And I'm like, no, I want sex. So, but no, seriously, it's so bizarre. Like, if you try it, you will be amazed. And I'm talking, like, go way out of your way to get lots of affection. I don't care if you hang on people. Find some people you can go hang on that won't mind you doing that. So I did that a lot. I found friends, and I would just, like, women especially, but, safe people. If it's opposite sex people, you're not going to get in trouble with. But, where you just hang on to people. I was just clingy, I was just, like, clingy. But it was really amazing how much that filled my tank and really, really helped me in, like, not being so out of control, as far as my sexual desires go, or wanting to, if I was going through thinking, like, I can't do it, I'm not going to be able to make it. I mean, there were times that I thought I wasn't going to be able to do it. I would call my friends up, and, sometimes I'd call 5 girlfriends in a row and cry and say, I can't do it, I can't do it, and because I'm just, where I thought I was just going to call somebody up and go sleep with them or something like that, and my friends would egg me on and tell me I'm worth it and tell me I was valuable. So I'd call one person after another till I wore them all out and got my tank full. And but that's the kind of support that you need if you're going to go through a change like this, because this is not a small change that you're making in your life. Depending upon how much this is ingrained, just understand that's a normal part of the process, that there is no magic wand, poof, you're fine. Like any significant growth takes time, and you need other people for that. The other thing too, if you're trying to shift over into, changing into abstinence, is understanding that you're going to fall. Have that be, like not the end of the world. Have that be that you're just doing the best you can, and if you do, find out, like, what was it that set you up for failure? There's certain things, it's not like you just jumped into bed with somebody. Something led up to that. You know what I'm saying? So you take a look at, okay, what happened? Where did this break down? Because I said I didn't want to have sex with anybody. So where did I get to the point of no return? Did I get to that point, like when somebody called me? There could be maybe people that aren't safe in your life that you need to avoid. That you need to create some distance because you can't talk to them or you're going to wind up in bed with them. If that's the case, then you need to have friends that, that are there to help you to say, well, don't do the temptation. If you can't be around that person without having sex with them, then don't be around that person. Maybe that's the point of no return for you, like you can't even talk to them. Or maybe the point of maybe the situation was, like can't handle being alone with somebody, especially at the beginning. If this is really hard for you, you need to take a lot of precautions. You need to sort of back up all the way to the preliminary stuff so you don't get yourself in too far that you can't say no anymore. Do you know what I mean? Where know what it is for you and get honest. Don't be fooling yourself. Really figure out, where are you at? Can you say no? You know, if you're alone with somebody, can you really say no? How about with some alcohol? Can you say no? You know, come on, get real about this. Are you able to say no if you're alone and have alcohol with somebody, or is that a risk? If your goal is to try and be abstinent, then don't put yourself in that position, you know? So if you do fall, take a look at what can you learn. You know, where did this all kind of fall apart on you, you know, and what you need to do. You know, a good policy is to promise to call a friend or some accountable people before you go jump in and do something. You know, if you know, like sometimes we'll set it up when we're trying to help somebody in this, where we'll say, okay, you call us. You know, we'll give like a circle of friends that are helping support this. You call us before you call that guy you want to have sex with, you know? Or before you call him, hey, you're allowed to go have sex with him if you want, it's your life, but just promise to call us first, if that's what you choose. That's the promise, you know? So sometimes it is that you just need somebody to remind you why you're doing this and to help you keep the vision of what you want in your life. You know, so these are things that you can do to help build other habits in your life. So, in summary, for all of this, it really is like, again, it's coming back to the vision of what it is that you want for your life, you know, and if you want that relationship, you know, to work, the lifelong relationship, if that's something that matters to you, then, you know, then isn't it worth doing everything that you can to build something, you know, where you can really trust in that, you know? Because honestly, I think that there's nothing greater, you know, other than your relationship with God and Jesus Christ. There's nothing sweeter than having that person that you know for a fact, you know, will be there and you could trust and you love their company and you're in love with them and making love and all that for your whole entire life. But it's all of these things are challenging, changing habits. If you've had sex before and you want to try abstinence, you know, because that's the thing. The first part is really thinking about this stuff. Let's say you've been having sex for a while and this is new to you. You came into this and you're going, God, are you kidding me? This is what God says. Yikes. So maybe there's just some time that you need to take just to think about it and to say, does this make sense? To reflect on your life and to see how things have played out in your life. You know, to just take a look and see, has that really worked for you? Or, you know, and just, you know, seek, you know, like examine your heart and examine your life and think about it, ponder on it, pray on it, you know. And so maybe you move it from, I think that's crazy, to, you know what, it kind of sounds like it could work, but it's not for me. That was where I was for a while. Like I finally thought, yeah, I believe that the Bible could be true about this, but I'm too old. There's no way I'm going to change. You know, it's great for young people. Maybe some young people could start off that way, but it's over for me. So maybe that's your next step. And then like, okay, I believe it's true, but I'm not doing it. You'll never get me to do that. 2, maybe looking at, you know what, my life is maybe not working as much as I thought it was. I might be ready to try it God's way. That's where I got, where I was just like, you know what, maybe God's got a point. I'm not going to know until I try. Honestly, I had no idea what I was going to find. I was just kind of like, what I'm doing is not working. So let me see if there might be some possible point to God doing this. And I was shocked at what I found out. It was just, it changed my worldview, my life, my perspective. I felt valued more than I ever had in my life. I had more understanding and more clarity in the relationships and the people that I dated. It was amazing. I could see crazy people so much easier and step away. It was great. It was really great. Instead of sleeping with crazy people and staying stuck with them forever, you know, and be able to recognize when I met somebody that had the qualities that I could be married to, that I was able to recognize that and be the kind of person that they would be attracted to, because I'm sure Adam would not have been attracted to me back in my old ways and my old self. I'm sure he would have ran the other direction, which, you know, when you're doing unhealthy things, great people are going to run the other way from you, and as they should, you know. The thing is, until you change, the good people are not going to be attracted to you. And you have to just be realistic about that, that if you want somebody that's really great and to treat you well, that you have to do the growing and the healing yourself, you know. So anyway, God doesn't make up just arbitrary rules. He made lovemaking. He made it awesome. He made it wonderful. He made it to be great and to bond people, weld two people together for life. to be deep and close and intimate and wonderful in every way. And that's why it feels so great. You know, it's just like, think about the whole idea, you know, one flesh. You know, a man is inside a woman, and the whole idea of orgasm and what that experience is, how close that is as far as building two people together. God did that. Isn't that the coolest thing ever? To feel that close to somebody? Wow. So, but doing it His way is where we're going to really be blessed, and where the best sex in the world is in alignment with God's heart in it, where it's about relationship. It's about having it with the person that you're spending your life with, your soulmate, the person that you're in love with.
Overall, the experiences were confusing. Being emotionally distant and being physically inside a woman was very disconcerting. It brought feelings of that I was desired and loved, and yet the emptiness that I felt during the act, and even getting to it where I can remember just that was my desire. That was my only desire.
So I started dating older guys in the military, and I started this pattern where I would be dating somebody, and as soon as I think it kind of started like my boyfriend had went on deployment, and you know, the first couple of months I was writing, and then by the 6th month I was dating somebody else. I needed to have that void filled in my life and in my heart, and so dating these older guys, I always felt inadequate as well. They said, "Oh, you're the youngest girl that I ever dated," and that made me feel like I needed to work extra hard so that I can prove to them that I was experienced like the older women that they had dated previously, and so I felt inadequate, and I felt like I had to prove myself to them. And at that time as well, I thought that being in a relationship meant that you had to have sex. If you wanted to show somebody that you cared about them, then you were going to have sex. Like, that was just kind of part of the deal. There was, at that time, I never heard of being abstinent. Like, that was the strangest idea to me. Nobody was being abstinent, and if somebody was, it was really strange. And so, you know, I watched a lot of TV as well, and I looked at all the women on TV and you know, flaunting around in bikinis and really revealing clothing, and so that's what I wanted to do. That's who I wanted to be. I wanted to be attractive to men, and I wanted to be sexy, and I wanted to be all of these things. I wanted to be a woman. You know, when I was really a girl, I was a teenager.
I was really emotionally distant. I would resort to even looking at pornography to satisfy some of these needs, and even growing more distant from who I was with, and that was just completely destructive and hurt me much more than I understood, and that's something I'm coming to understand now.
There's this one guy that was apparently the hottest guy in our class at the whole school. You know, thousands of people went to the school, but for a Korean guy, he was considered one of the hottest guys on campus, and he was giving me just a little bit of attention, and I was like, oh God, like, whoa, you know. But I knew he had a girlfriend. I mean, the last thing I knew about him was that he had a girlfriend, and so, like, you know, he was obviously giving me attention, and so I was like, okay, cool, like, you know, he likes me or whatever, or he's interested. I think at that point I just wanted someone to like want me, you know, whatever way, and so the only thing I ever did, the only one night stand I ever had in my whole life was with him. And I remember before it happened, I was like, don't you have a girlfriend? And he's like, yeah, but we have an understanding. So I didn't care, and I knew what that meant, but I just didn't really care. And so, what happened, and you know, strangely enough, I did feel pretty cheap, like afterwards. Like, I thought it would make me feel better, but it didn't really make me feel better.
How I would get with like girls, or when I would get with girls, would mostly be like older women, older girls, I guess. Because I would tell them that all I wanted, or that all that I was able to give anybody was um, was just sex, really. And but I would always I would tell him like right before, like kind of, you know, like we would start like getting into like physical stuff, and we would go, like I might take a girl out like on a date, you know, and then go back to who's ever house, and then um before like anything physical, I would kind of just say, you know, um I'm not looking for anything serious. Uh, I'm not looking for a relationship. Um, but you know, if you want to do this, then I'm cool with that. If you don't, I'm cool with that too. And in a way, you know, in my mind, I knew that they weren't gonna say like, oh no, I'm not cool with this because you're like already, you know, half the time you got your half your clothes off or whatever, and it's like awkward to get up and go after that. But I that's the way I justified it in my own head and made myself feel okay about what I was doing. Was I would say, okay, I told them that. I said my piece. I said, hey, look, you know, I told them what was up. I told them I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm not looking for anything serious. But we can be friends with benefits. You know, I wouldn't use those exact words, but pretty much what it comes down to, that's what it was. And and they would be cool with that. Uh, and so I thought there was like, all right, there's no feelings are gonna get hurt. Um, I can go about living my life, they can go about living theirs, and it's all gonna be good. And it, like I said, it never felt good after. Um, it never felt good like after you're done. It's like, how do I get out of this girl's house, or how do I get this girl out of my house? And feeling that, and like wondering why I wanted to get out always confused me. Um, Wondering why I wanted like this girl who I thought, you know, I wanted to like kind of like sleep with or whatever. You know, it's a girl. It's like, this is like, you know, this is what the world tells you is good. You know, to have a girl there, and like always wondered why I wanted to like get out pretty much like immediately.
Then I started dating this other guy, and he would only call me at night, and I never caught on that he'd only call me at night, and I thought that was normal. I was totally blinded and didn't even get what he was doing. So I so we hung out for a couple months, and then finally one day he was like, "Oh, do you want to come over to my house?" Which we had never been. We used to go to his friend's house or wherever. And so finally he says, "Oh, do you want to come to my house?" So I said, "Sure." And so with this guy, I thought he was just the cutest guy, and you know, I just would get butterflies every time he would call, and you know, I wanted for things to go further, and so you know, I thought that this was a good sign. Oh, he's inviting me to his house to go watch a movie. So I go over there, and every time this guy would call, I'd always make myself available to go and hang out with him. And so he called, and I hung out with him, and we were going to watch a movie. And so before the movie starts, he tells me, like in a serious voice at that, he says, "So we're going to watch this movie, we're going to have sex, and then I'm going to take you home." And I laughed, thinking, that sounds ridiculous. Like, you know, don't tell me what to do. Or, I mean, I wasn't even planning on having sex with him, and we had never had sex. And so we watched this movie, and then he, you know, ends up putting the moves on me, and we end up having sex, and the condom breaks, um, and then we just stopped having sex, and he's like, "All right, I'll take you home." And it was a really awkward ride home. He didn't say anything. He just like dropped me off. And so that was really weird to me at that time. And then I waited for him to call me. He never called, so I called him. I called him, I called his brother, and no response. He never called me again after that. And here I am thinking we're going to the next level. Him inviting me to his house and then having sex with him. It didn't even dawn on me until I think the next day or after he dropped me off. I remember just sitting in bed thinking, oh my God, like we did what he said we were gonna do, and it didn't even dawn on me at the moment when things were happening that that was gonna happen. I didn't even say anything when he said that.
Looking back on a lot of those things now, not only is it embarrassing, but it really sucks to realize how bad I hurt other people and the girls who I was with. I was raised by two women. I have a single mom and my sister who's older, and to think about somebody treating them like that, like how I treated girls, even though I thought I was like a good guy by telling them that, that I didn't want anything up front, so I wouldn't lie to them the whole time. But thinking of that, if guys treated even like that's not a good guy. If somebody did that to my sister, I would not think that's a good guy. I have a lot more to say about that, but I can't because I'm on camera. But it's when I think about it closer to home, somebody were to do that to my sister, it it really it it hurts me to know that I did that to some people's sisters, that I did that to kids' moms, and I feel like since I'm gonna remember that, they're gonna remember that, and that it's not who I want to be. I never thought about that before, but that's not who I want to be. That's not how I want to be remembered, as someone that hurts people, as a player. It's not what I think a man is. Um, I I think about sometimes going back and like how I can like change things, and it's not possible. But I want to tell people that I'm sorry. I want to I know that there's a lot of people, girls out there that I hurt. Uh, and the fact is, I probably won't get to say that I'm sorry to a lot of them, and that sucks.
The hardest thing for me to deal with is really coming to terms with the people that I hurt, and that's including myself, but in particular, the women that I took advantage of, that I didn't respect that they were in a relationship. I have had sex with married women. I've had sex with people with boyfriends, and people I didn't even know their name, like I said, and I can't even imagine how that must feel for especially the two girls that I had sex with who I didn't even acknowledge after, and what that must feel like if I had sex with them and they were viewing it quite differently, I'm sure, and they just looked at me after and I pretended like it didn't even happen, and I can't, that's just devastating to me, and I can't even believe that was me at this point. So I look back with a lot of regret, but I also understand that this was something that I grew up misunderstanding a lot of things, and my resultant behavior was because of that.
The good thing in both those relationships was that we never partook in sexual activity, which I feel helped a lot in the mourning process, because it was already, both of them were very hurtful, and they're different in their own ways, but I couldn't imagine how much harder it would be if we actually would have had sex.
I don't want to live with regrets in the way I've treated like people that I love and care for. So one of the ways that I think that I can do that is to honor them by not touching them like in ways that I don't want to be doing until I'm much more committed down the line, just because I don't want to feel the pain of having lost someone after having been so intimate with them, because it just really hurts. Like, I've really felt hurt in the past by that. Same thing for me is with sex, is that I feel much more comfortable if I wait for sex, because even when I broke up with my last girlfriend and it was so incredibly painful, we never had sex, and it was so difficult. Like, it was just completely, like, my heart was just so broken. And I just think that if we would have had sex on top of all that, it would have just increased the challenge so much. And now I'm in another relationship, and I'm with someone amazing now. Like, I don't want to have memories when I'm with the person I'm with now of the other people that I've been with before, because I just don't want to. I don't want to think about them when I'm with her. I want where I'm at now to be just all about her. Like, she's my girl, and like she's who I want to be with. And so that's sort of the reason that I don't have sex before, because I want to know that there's that commitment, and I want to know that it's going to be safe. And that's actually, I think, one of the greatest romantic things there is to build that kind of safety, because I know that I'm not going to get hurt, and I know it's going to honor her.
I wouldn't want anybody to go through have a sex life like I've had it, and it's very embarrassing for me to talk about now. It's disgusting, and I hope just what I want now is so much different than what I had in mind before. I realize now that that I only want to have sex with one more person in my life, and who is going to be my wife. And I'm learning about being abstinent. I've been abstinent for like 5 months or something now, and even after only 5 months, I feel like I can't go back to how I lived before. I feel like God is telling me, like, this is how it was supposed to be, and all the hurt that I've experienced and the realization of the hurt that I've caused other people would have never happened, you know, if I didn't have sex with, you know, all those girls before. And if, like, I don't know how that would feel to not have gone through that, but I wish I could feel it. I wish I could feel like that I've saved myself for the one girl that I wanted to be with for the rest of my life. But I can't, and that sucks. It sucks to know that one day that I want to get married, and that she's gonna know that I've had sex before, and it sucks to know that we're probably gonna talk about that, and because if I didn't do any of that, it would be like almost perfect, but it's not, and so I have to live with that, but I still feel hope. I feel hope that I can change, that I have changed. I feel hope for the future, that I'm gonna find somebody someday that is gonna accept me for all the crap that I've done, for the person who I was. I feel hope that that I can find somebody that wants the same things that I do, because I want to wait. I want to wait until I get married to have sex. And it sounds funny saying it because you never hear that, but I do, and that's what I really want.